Good morning. We'll give everyone just a few minutes to join. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining us today for our property owner webinar. This one is going to cover budgets, tax rates, and tax bills, and how you can impact your property tax bill. As we go through today's webinar, there is a Q&A feature up in the bar of the webinar. If you have any questions while we go through the presentation, feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll circle back and answer some questions. So with that, let's get started. So the property tax system in Texas is very complex, and there's a lot of moving parts. So to start things off, we need to understand who does what in this process. So the appraisal district, which is our office, we are the first player in the property tax system in Texas. And we determine a market value for every property in Travis County. Then we send out a notice of appraised value that outlines the value of your property, the market value, the appraised value, and any exemptions. And then if you don't agree with that market value, you have the opportunity to protest, and our office also handles all of those protests. This past summer, we handled 220,000 protests. So we get a large volume of protests every summer, and that is about half the work that we do in our office. And then we also administer exemption applications, which exemptions, we have a whole webinar on exemptions because they are such an important part of the property tax system, and really the way a property owner can directly impact their tax bill. So if you have questions on exemptions, go back and watch that webinar for some more information on that. The second player in the property tax system in Texas are the taxing units. And those are arguably the most important because they set a budget and a tax rate that funds that budget to provide services. And ultimately, they're the ones determining your overall tax burden. And then the third player is the tax office. And in Travis County, our tax assessor collector is Celia Israel, and her office collects and they calculate and mail the property tax bill and then collect those payments and distribute them to all of the taxing entities. They also handle things like vehicle registration, license plates, voter registration, disability placards. So a lot of other processes not related to the property tax system that are handled at the tax office, but they are the ones that calculate, mail, and collect the tax bill. And the property tax system in Texas is an annual cycle. So on January 1, the Texas Property Tax Code, the statutes that we have to follow, they dictate that we appraise property at 100% of market value as of January 1st. So that is our assessment date each year. Then around April 1st, we start sending notices of appraised value that outline those values that we've determined for properties. And then generally, property owners have until May 15th to protest that market value. We will go through the summer months, hearing informal meetings with property owners and then holding formal hearings with the Appraisal Review Board. And by July 25th, the appraisal district certifies an appraisal roll, which is sent to all of the taxing entities in Travis County. And those are the values that are used to determine their budget and tax rates. So that's kind of where we're at right now in the cycle. They've received their certified roll, and now they're developing the budgets and the tax rates to fund the services that we all want. So those hearings to set the budget and tax rates for every taxing entity are held throughout August and September. Once those tax rates are adopted, then tax bills will start going out, usually in November. And then the day that we're all familiar with, we have to pay our property taxes by January 31st of each of the following year. So calculating a property tax is really a simple formula. You just take the taxable value times the tax rate that that taxing entity is set, and that gives you the amount owed to that taxing entity. You do pay taxes to multiple taxing entities. You'll see on your tax bill, you probably have the county, maybe a city, and then there's also some MUDs and water districts that could be on your tax bill. So you would have to calculate that tax due to each taxing entity and then sum up to get your total tax bill that you're going to pay for the year. There's also three key factors that we need to understand. The first being the appraised value, and that's that value that's determined by the appraisal district each year. And then exemptions is the second term. And exemptions can be things that the property owner is entitled to or the property itself. For example, there's a general residence homestead exemption, and as long as you own and occupy your property, you can claim that exemption. And what an exemption does is take value directly off your taxable value so that you're paying less value in taxes. So that taxable value would get reduced by the exemptions. And so then when you calculate your value times your tax rate, that gives the amount of tax due. And the purpose of the appraisal district in the Texas property tax system is to allocate the tax burden. So we like to explain this like a pie. So the appraisal is just determining your size of a slice of that pie. And so a house that costs maybe $500,000 isn't being taxed the same amount as someone whose house is worth $200,000. So it's really a fairness aspect so that that tax burden is distributed fairly amongst property owners. And the Texas Constitution has repeatedly affirmed this concept of truth in taxation. But what does that mean? And essentially, all it is tax transparency. So the legislature wants taxing entities to inform taxpayers about their budgets and their rates that will affect those property owners, and then give them the opportunity to provide feedback. And so that is the process that we're within right now in the cycle. So tax transparency, back in the 2019 legislative session, I believe, we created this travistaxes.com database. And each county in Texas has a database they maintain. So the first step is going to be just visiting travistaxes.com. And then you'll have a search bar where you can type in your name, your address, property ID to pull up your specific property. And you'll see here, this is the landing page. Once you pull up your property, it'll give you some information about the property itself, such as the owner, property address, and then the market value. A little further down on the screen, you're going to see your 2025 property taxes or your prior year tax bill. You're also going to see what's called a no new revenue rate, which is the tax you would pay if the entity adopted the no new revenue rate, which we'll explain further in a minute. And then you'll also see a column for your 2026 proposed tax bill based on the proposed rate that each taxing entity has populated in this database. So you can see here, if you just look at the difference between the 2026 proposed and the 2025 taxes you paid, in this example, the taxes are actually being proposed at a lower amount than last year. But you can see this no new revenue rate, which we'll explain further, it's actually lower than the proposed rate. So in this scenario, this no new revenue rate is the rate that would give them the same amount of revenue as last year. So if they adopted that rate, that would give them just the same amount of money. It would be about $2,700 for their tax bill. The proposed rate is at $2,800 here. So you can see based on this, it is a tax increase because the proposed taxes are higher than the amount of taxes that would have been populated if they got no new revenue for this year. So those terms that are used during this process, such as the no new revenue rate, they've actually been around for many, many years, but we've changed the title to them. So the no new revenue rate, again, is just the tax rate that would give the taxing entity the same amount of revenue as last year based on this year's property values. And again, anything adopted above that no new revenue rate is a tax increase. There's also a voter approval rate, and this is the rate that the limiting rate that an entity could go up to before they have to go ask the voters for approval to pass that rate. So that voter approval rate requires the taxing entity to go to the property owners through the general election in November and ask them if that voter approval rate is okay. The third is the proposed rate, and this is the rate that is currently being proposed by the taxing entity through that tax rate setting process. And again, if this rate is higher than that no new revenue rate, it is a tax increase. If that proposed rate is higher than the voter approval tax rate, then they'll have to go out in that general November general election and ask for approval to go above that rate. And then at the end of the tax rate process, the adopted rate is the tax rate that is actually adopted by the taxing entity and what you'll see on your tax bill. So here is another screenshot showing for the city of Austin for this property owner. You can see right here the 2026 proposed taxes are $972.11. And the proposed tax rate is right above that. The no new revenue rate in this scenario, the taxes based on that rate would be $897.55. So as you can see here, 897 is less than the 972. So this is a proposed tax increase. However, the voter approval rate right here, if they were to exceed that rate, they would have to go to the property owners and ask for that voter approval tax rate election. So they are going directly right up to the voter approval rate in this scenario. You can also see the dates and times of when each entity is going to host their public hearing on their budget and their tax rates. And we see, again, 220,000 property owners protest their property value every year, but you may see 10 to 15 people at a budget or tax rate hearing. And that is ultimately where you can make the most impact on your tax bill is with the taxing entities and the services they're providing and the tax rate that's needed to fund those services. It's also very difficult. You know, each entity has a budget. They'll each have their own public hearing for that budget. They'll each have their own public hearing for the tax rate. And they're often in the middle of the day, in the work day. So it's difficult for property owners to get to those hearings and attend those meetings, but they are provided here in one place so you can easily see where all of your taxing entities are going to be meeting and at what date and time. There's also some contact information. You can see the website for the taxing unit, the phone number, email address, who their tax assessor collector is, and then you can also see their worksheet for their budget and tax rate information. There's a tab also for the historical tax rate, so you can see the trends over the last few years. And then there's a feedback option. And again, so these entities are having budget and tax rate hearings. You know, we have over 200 entities in Travis County, and they're each going to have an individual meeting. They're during the day. They're hard to get to. We understand that. So we've incorporated some feedback functionality into the site where you can leave a comment regarding the proposed tax rate or proposed budget, and then provide that directly to the taxing entity from this travistaxes.com website. You'll also see for any entity that offers a tax limitation or a tax ceiling, this information will be provided on the travistaxes.com site as well. So for any school district in Texas, they are required to offer a tax ceiling. And what this does is when you reach the age of 65, your school taxes get frozen in that year. So you'll never pay more than the year you turn 65 in school taxes. If you hover over that tax limitation button, you'll see a pop-up that will show you the tax limitation that is available on this property. Also, if you're over the age of 65 and you feel like you should qualify for this exemption, um, and you're not seeing that tax limitation information on your property, reach out to our customer service group and we can help you with that process and make sure we have an application on file. So this November, the general election is going to be November 3rd. And again, it is our duty as property owners and voting members of society that we participate in these local elections. We'll have several entities in Travis County that will probably be going out for voter approval tax rate elections that directly impact your property tax bill. There will also likely be some entities going out for bonds. So these are both going to be on that November 3rd general election. And it's so important for us to provide our feedback on what we feel is important as property owners and taxpayers. And again, you have a voice. So attend those budget and tax rate hearings. Provide online feedback to your locally elected officials. They want to hear it. They want to hear what's important to their constituents. So attend those hearings, give them feedback. And then the last day to register to vote is October 5th. Get registered to vote and then vote on November 3rd and give them that feedback. Let your voice be heard. And with that, we will go ahead and take some questions. At the end of every webinar and event we do ask for feedback. So there's a QR code on the screen that'll take you to a quick survey that you can tell us how you enjoyed, if you enjoyed this webinar, if there's additional information you'd like us to include. So please give us feedback on that. All right. And let me get to the questions. So again, if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A. And I'm not seeing any, but if you think of something after you've watched this webinar, our customer service group is available Monday through Friday. You can reach them by phone or email. The presentation had their phone number and email, but it's 512-834-9317 is our phone number. And our email address for customer service is csinfo@tcadcentral.org. Thank you all again for attending this webinar and check back for additional webinars that we'll have posted on our website. Thank you.